Quite a busy day at Guantanamo Bay today. Mark Fallon, the author of Unjustifiable Means and the co-founder of Althea FX with Maria Hartwig, was scheduled to testify at Guantanamo Bay in the pretrial hearings of the bombing of the USS Cole and the post 9/11 investigations of Al Qaeda and the Guantanamo Five of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, Mustafa al-Hawsawi, Walid bin Attash, and Omar al-Baluchi, the trials before the military commissions. And also a report from the United Nations has come out, and the New York Times has reported on it, and it's Carol Rosenberg once again. So what I like to do is I like to share the screen and we'll read the article together. As you can see, conditions at Guantanamo are cruel and inhumane, the UN investigation finds. And there's Carol Rosenberg, who is the lead reporter out of Guantanamo, and to my opinion, the best. The last 30 detainees at Guantanamo Bay, including the men accused of plotting the September 11 attacks, are being held by the United States under circumstances that constitute cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment under international law, a United Nations human rights investigator said on Monday. Now, on top of this, you also have a lot of the detainees that are not charged with anything, like Abu Zubaydah, who's considered a forever prisoner, and a couple of others who are being charged with miscellaneous crimes connected before 9/11. Fionnuala Ni Aolain, a law professor in Minnesota, serving as special rapporteur on counterterrorism and human rights, included the finding in a report drawn from a 4-day visit to the prison in February, which included meetings with an undisclosed number of detainees and interviews with lawyers and former prisoners. She issued the report 1 month before her term as rapporteur ends. She specifically cited the cumulative effects of inadequate health care, solitary confinement, restraints, and use of force to remove prisoners from their cells as contributing to her conclusions. She said the conditions at the prison may also meet the legal threshold for torture. Ms. Ni Aolain was the first United Nations investigator to be granted access to the detention center in its 2-decade history. What does that tell you? She said in an interview that she met with a cross-section of the 34 prisoners who were there in February, including former CIA detainees who are facing criminal charges and others who have been approved for transfer to other nations. Today, 30 remain. As part of her mandate, Ms. Ni Aolain also met with families of the victims of terrorism. The report called the attacks on September 11, 2001, a crime against humanity. But Ms. Ni Aolain pointedly called the United States and its use of torture and the men now facing criminal charges at Guantanamo Bay the single most significant barrier to fulfilling victims' rights to justice and accountability. The torture, she said, was a betrayal of the rights of victims of the 9/11 attacks. In response, the Biden administration released a 1-page defense of the detention operation, saying that current detainees at the Pentagon prison live communally and prepare meals together, receive specialized medical and psychiatric care, are given full access to legal counsel, and communicate regularly with family members. This is all after the fact that for the last, umpteenth amount of years, they were brutally tortured by the CIA and foreign nation security services, and then brought over here where they were treated harshly on top of it for the last 16, 17 years. Remember, at one time, there was like over 800 prisoners. Most of them were released. The report highlighted the case of Ali Hamza al-Bahul, a former aide to Osama bin Laden who is currently serving a life sentence in isolation, raising serious concerns of solitary confinement in contravention to the international law. The prison intends to put him near other detainees 4 hours a day, the report said, but may not adhere to that plan. Ms. Ni Aolain hope I'm saying her name correctly, offered the latest in mounting international criticism of healthcare provided to the detainees, particularly the inadequacy of facilities at the BR to treat an aging, vulnerable population, and the absence of comprehensive, holistic torture rehabilitation. She urged the United States to establish an independent civilian healthcare program for prisoners who were tortured by the United States. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 4 other prisoners accused of plotting the September 11 attacks are making a similar demand in negotiations that were initiated more than a year ago by prosecutors who proposed that the men would plead guilty in exchange for life in prison rather than face a death penalty trial. And I think what's going to happen is that this deal is going to be made. And the horrifying aspect of this is that we will probably not know what the prosecution had in terms of evidence and what they didn't have. Because what they have will be classified and under matters of national security for the next 30, 40 years. That's what I think will happen here. Whereas if there was a trial, we may have been able to know what evidence was used. Ms. Ni Aolain and said other detainees have permanent disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, and chronic pain, including joint, gastrointestinal, and urinary issues, as well as untreated post-traumatic stress disorder. She blamed torture and rendition programs for some of the medical issues. She attributed some of them to long-term detention, hunger striking, and force feeding at Guantanamo Bay. Ms. Ni Aolain's visit was the first known visit to the prison infrastructure by an independent observer since the detention center's staff dismantled media relations in April 2019. Until this year, successive U.S. administrations had given only the Red Cross and defense lawyers access to the facility and to talk to the prisoners. The Biden administration offered the rapporteur a visit as part of an initiative to more actively engage with UN human rights investigative bodies. The report criticized the United States for failing to provide trauma treatment and ensure the rights of more than 700 former Guantanamo prisoners. In fact, I interviewed one, Mohammed al-Slahi, who was considered the #1 prisoner, most dangerous, yet he was the most innocent, one of them anyway. And he was there for 16 years. Most have been repatriated, although some, most Yemenis, were sent to the countries for resettlement. She described the released prisoners as stigmatized by their detention, in some cases deprived of basic human rights and requiring reparations. She also urged reparations for the current detainees and victims of terrorism, particularly the children of September 11 victims, saying they should be permitted to pursue financial, educational, and trauma support as remedies that a surviving parent may have waived. The White House did not issue a response to Ms. Ni Aolain's remarks on Monday, but President Biden released a statement noting that it was the International Day in support of victims of torture and declaring the United States opposition to all forms of inhumane treatment and our commitment to eliminating torture and assisting torture survivors as they heal and in their quest for justice. Mr. Biden criticized torture in Russia, Syria, and North Korea, adding, "I call on all nations around the world to join me in supporting rehabilitation and justice for torture survivors and in taking action to eliminate torture and inhumane treatment for good. Meanwhile, you have no problem spending billions of dollars in wars like Ukraine and also to Syria. You were the vice president under Barack Obama, and you had to, along with Obama, approve of a covert CIA operation called Timber Sycamore, in which the United States, Jordan, Israel, and the Gulf, and Turkey all supplied and gave logistical weapons and financial aid to sloppy terrorist groups in the hopes of overthrowing Bashar Assad. That's what you did. Needless to say, how many billions of dollars in aid you gave to Saudi Arabia in their war against Yemen, the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. And that's why I don't find your remarks about torture appealing. Continue. Ms. Ni Aolain, however, pointedly argued that the United States had an obligation to address its legacy of torture. There is no statute for limitations on torture, she said. Those who penetrated it, perpetrated it, engaged in it, concealed it, remain liable for the entireties of their lives, end quote. Now, let's talk about the report. Now, I'm not going to read the whole report. It's 23 pages. But what I'm going to do is basically, as you can see, this is the United Nations Human Rights Special Procedures Report, technical visits to the United States and Guantanamo detention facility by the Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. I'm going to link this report at the bottom of the screen so you can read it. But what we're going to do is go all the way down to the area where it's the conclusion. Okay, conclusion. And we won't read all of it, but we'll read. There's a lot here. 63 points. I can read the first two, in which we'll, talk about some of the things that she had to witness and talked about. So this is because I don't want to cut it off. So this way, all right. The SR finds that the United States had failed to promote and protect fundamental fair trial guarantees and severely impeded the detainees' access to justice. Based on the cumulative conditions of fair trial violations set out above, compounded by the lack of access to family, significant physical and mental health problems, and other conditions of confinement. The SR determines that it is highly unlikely that any detainee can effectively assist with and participate in their own defense. Moreover, she finds that the compounding effect on the above-mentioned fair trial violations with respect to all present detainees, regardless of their category of legal proceedings, are of such gravity as to give the deprivation of liberty an arbitrary character. She also determines that the fact that all of the men detained or have been Muslim men of foreign nationalities separately leads to a systematic finding of arbitrary deprivation of liberty on the grounds of discrimination. And I'm not going to read the rest. It's a lot there. And like I said, I'll put it in the description for you. You can read at your leisure. That's a lot to unpack here. And look, I would like to be hopeful, not pessimistic, about a trial for the Guantanamo 5 in their alleged part of the September 11 attacks. It's been 20 years now since the capture and detainment of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shibin arrest. And we haven't had even a remote chance of a startup to these trials. They've been delayed and delayed and went through 3 judges so far, 3. And what we can hope for is that the Southern District of New York will continue the Creedler and Creedler civil litigation case against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for their role in providing logistical and financial support to at least 2 of the 9/11 hijackers in Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. And even though that's looking poor, and with the trial looking poor, there's not much hope to go around. But it's not over yet. And as long as I'm around, I will continue to give you the latest updates. And let's hope that we see some progress, and that we can hold people accountable. Like I said, I'm not going to hold my breath, but I'm not giving up. And I hope you aren't either. All right. Have a good night, guys. See you in the next video.